It is February 26, 2007. My name is Don Linky. We're here on the campus of Rutgers University in New Brunswick at the Eagleton Institute of Politics. We're going to continue our discussion this afternoon with Barry H. Evenchick for the Brendan T. Byrne Archive. Barry, in our last session, we discussed the sort of dark days of the Byrne administration in the first term as the governor's popularity declines as a result of the income tax debate. You said that you never told him what you thought about him running for re-election and that he never really asked. Did you sense any change in his mood as those critics gained steam?
Well, I did not sense any particular change in his mood, although I have to tell you that I saw less of him in those days than at other times in the first administration or in the second administration, and so it wasn't necessarily unusual that he didn't ask and I didn't have a chance to tell him my thoughts about running. That isn't to say I didn't see him at all, but I was not in close touch with him at that particular period of time.
Of course, there was quite a bit of speculation as to whether he would decide to run for re-election given his low approval ratings in the polls. Did other friends or associates try to get their opinions to him through you, knowing your close relationship with him?
No one did that, but I do remember picking up through the inevitable grapevine that people who were close to him were suggesting that he should not run again. I mean, I couldn't tell you now who they were or how I learned of it, but you pick that sort of intelligence up along the way, and I have to say, looking back, that I wish, in a way, I had had the opportunity to have urged him, as John Degnan did, against all odds, as they say, to run. But I wasn't that prophetic, and as I think I mentioned to you before, if he had asked me at that time, I probably, with great reluctance, would have suggested that he not run. Only because of my regard for him and my concern that to run and be defeated would be humiliating, and I just couldn't imagine Brendan having to suffer such humiliation.
If you didn't have discussions directly with him, were there others in the family that you talked to or approached you about what you thought?
Well, I remember talking with my wife about it, and she knew Brendan by that time as well as I, and had the same kind of regard for him, and I did discuss it with her, and I think she was generally in agreement with me at that moment in time that things looked so dismal. He was so low in the standings that it just, you didn't have to be a genius to figure out that he had little shot at getting reelected, to say nothing of even getting nominated. So those were dark days insofar as I was concerned. Yeah, the only thing that might have caused me to tell him to run, had he asked me, is the regard I had for him then, and frankly the admiration that I felt for his courage, because he did a lot of things, principally with the income tax, in that first go-round, that took courage. The late Dick Hughes, I think, referred to Brendan as a fellow who had a lot of moxie. That was a good word that Governor Hughes had to describe Brendan. So I was glad, needless to say, that he did decide to run again, but I can't tell you that I would have so advised him if that occasion had arisen.
As a more than interested observer from the outside, was there a point in the campaign where you thought in 1977 things were starting to look up?
Well, yeah, there was. It seems to me it had to do with Ray Bateman's approach to the campaign, and his approach was inept. Well, I shouldn't say his approach was inept, but the plan that I remember hearing about, the Bateman-Simon plan, which at some point was identified by its initials, seemed to me to be unrealistic and to fly in the face of reality. And so as that message inevitably got out into the public domain, I think the tide began to turn a bit, and we began to believe that he might just snatch victory from the jaws of defeat.
Now, as the campaign progresses, and I guess your role is a little bit more on the outside than it was in 1973, where you did act as a surrogate at certain appearances for him. Did you talk to sort of other lawyers, friends, and as to what their opinions were, and what did you hear back?
You know, it's getting to be a long time ago, and as I reflect on it all, I have no really specific recollections, but general ones of talking to people, other lawyers that I knew and who knew and in some instances had worked for Byrne when he was the prosecutor and so forth. And those of us who knew him and were so generally supportive of him were enthusiastic that he was going to be able to pull it out. Again, it was hard to be an optimist at the inception of this because he was so low in the polls. I mean, it was just that was the reality of it. But as things went on, and a glimmer of hope began to shine through, while we were all rather encouraged, and it was a storybook ending.
Were you at the campaign headquarters on that night of the November 1977 election?
Yes. Yeah.
And describe what the atmosphere was like.
You know, I have some difficulty separating it out of my memory from the first election.
In 1973?
Yeah. But I do remember a feeling of happiness, a pervasive feeling of relief and joy and, frankly, amazement that it had come out the way it did. Much more than that I don't recall, except a room full of people, the usual, waiting for the governor to go on television with his victory speech and all that kind of thing. And it was just a feeling of elation.
I assume it was so hectic that night that you didn't have much time directly with Governor Byrne. When was the first time that you had time to sort of discuss the 77 election in a more relaxed setting?
You know, Don, I don't remember ever having a specific conversation with him in that second term that was involved with, you know, kind of post-morteming the election. I don't remember any such conversation. I really think that whatever conversations we had about the second election and the second campaign and the second 4 years came years later when I began to do some work on what I hope one day soon will be a book about Brendan Byrne that I've been working on. And in quiet moments and interviews that I did of him for the book, we talked about that a bit. Plus, in some of the interviews that I did for that project, including with Ray Bateman and others, I got into the subject of the second campaign and the second election. But I really do not remember any specific conversations with Brendan about the second campaign.
Now, after he is reelected in 1977, things begin to fall into place rapidly in the second term, and in policy initiatives, Pinelands, New Jersey Transit, series of other reforms that were implemented in the second term. Again, did you see his mood sort of changing? Was there a sense of greater confidence in the second term as he does accomplish all these things?
Well, I don't recall mood changes as much as he seemed perhaps a bit more relaxed generally. That isn't to suggest that he was uptight in the first 4 years, but he was under pressures in the first 4 years that any person would have to react to, and some of those pressures were obviously gone, having been reelected, and so more relaxed, perhaps, would be my term for the Brendan Byrne that I remember from those years.
Were you able to see him more frequently after the inauguration for the second term?
Yeah, we played maybe a little more tennis than we had in the first 4 years, and again, I recall a few occasions when my wife and I, would see Brendan and Jean socially. Not a huge number, but yeah, I saw him. I probably saw him a bit more often in the second 4 years, even though my involvement in state government was probably less in the second 4 years than it was in the first. In the second 4 years, I was more involved with developing my private practice of law, and I had done the things that I mentioned in a prior discussion that we had. I had already served as chairman of the State Motor Vehicle Study Commission, which he had asked me to do, and I had already served by his designation as counsel to the National Commission on Uniform Standards and Goals, Crime Commission that he chaired. I had done those things. So the second 4 years for me were more, on a personal level, more involved with my own private practice of law, and fewer direct contacts with him in terms of government.
Now, every governor gets suggestions from friends or constituents about things they would like to see done in New Jersey. Did you ever have the temptation to suggest to Brendan Byrne that he do this or that?
No, I really never did. At least I can't recall having that temptation. There were others who were busy doing that, and I remember feeling and being just generally supportive as I learned of this or that project that was in the offing. But I also don't recall that in the second 4 years there were as many momentous things that occurred in the administration. You referred to New Jersey Transit having come into being, and I remember that. You mentioned, I think you mentioned the Pinelands, and I recall that project or those efforts at preservation occurring. But as I thought about coming down today to continue our chat about the Byrne years, I confess I was less able to come up with specific examples of things that occurred in the second 4 years than I had been with regard to the first 4 years.
How about in your quasi-official role with the Uniform Law Commission? Were there legislative initiatives that were being recommended by the Commission that you were trying to push in New Jersey?
Well, yeah, let's see, for me, started when he appointed me in 1981, late in his years as governor, and I learned then that the National Conference of Uniform Law Commissioners was engaged in a number of projects, such as they weren't things that were household words, but such as modernizing the Uniform Commercial Code, updating and modernizing certain uniform acts that had been promulgated by the Uniform Law Conference. The Uniform Trust Code comes to mind, as I mentioned, the Uniform Commercial Code. And what I did do was take advantage of the fact that at least I knew the governor and his staff to try to curry support or garner support from the governor's office together with the legislative leadership to see New Jersey enact some of these statutes or proposed statutes that the Law Revision Commission was approving back in those early days. I say early days of my involvement with the Uniform Law Commission. Well, I don't recall that there was anything particularly controversial that emerged from that, or but yeah, I did whatever I could do as one of New Jersey's Uniform Law Commissioners to get some support from the governor's office for these proposed statutes.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the initiatives that started obviously in the first term, even before he was elected in 1973, was the development of the Meadowlands and the sports complex. First with Giant Stadium and the racetrack, and then later the arena. Initially the Brendan T. Byrne Arena.
Right. It's always going to be known as that to me.
Well, I wanted you to expand on that. You've recently taken a position on the naming of the arena, but why don't we start from the beginning and sort of talk about the first of all, the decision to name the arena after Governor Byrne. Did you think that was a good decision?
You know, I don't remember that I knew it was in the offing, and I didn't. And it wasn't until it was a fait accompli that I had occasion really to even think about it. And even as it happened, there was criticism. There were those who said that it was wrong for the arena to be named after the still sitting governor. There were those who said that he had orchestrated it. Others said, no, that isn't so. And I didn't know then, if I do now, the facts surrounding the naming of the arena. I was delighted that it was named, and aside from my personal relationship with him or my affection for him as a human being, I thought he deserved to have his name on that arena, because Brendan Byrne, probably more than any other person, was responsible for the sports complex coming into being. I mean, it was the project of Governor Cahill, and I wouldn't for a moment take away from Governor Cahill the fact that he was really responsible, I think, for this beginning. But you may recall, I'm sure you do, that the Sports Authority was in trouble. Giant Stadium was in trouble in terms of the financial community, and had Brendan not carried the ball with the bond community and the financial community in New York, I don't know that Giant Stadium ever would have happened. So, in a very real sense, he was responsible for the success of the Sports Authority and that whole concept, and it was fitting that the arena be named for him. At least I thought so. And it went a long way, in my mind, to offsetting the terrible moments in the beginning. For example, when Giant Stadium opened, Brendan Byrne couldn't step out on the field. I know I was there for opening day, maybe you were, and all the former governors were there, and every important person in the world was there, and Brendan Byrne was not to be seen on the field that day because I guess because it was obvious had he stepped out onto that field, 76,000 people would have booed him. So that was, in my view, a sad kind of commentary on the early Byrne years. But to move ahead to see his name on the arena was divine justice as far as I was concerned.
Now, as he moves toward the end of his second term, did you have discussions with him as to what the next sort of career move would be, either private, in the private sector, or another position in the public sector?
No, I didn't. I remember thinking in moments of just fantasizing how much fun it would be to kind of regroup with him professionally. I never discussed it. I don't remember ever hearing until it was a reality that he would join the Corella law firm. There may have been some rumors that floated around at that time about what he would be doing, but I don't think I ever talked with him about it, nor did he ever ask me for my advice. As I think back over all the years, he's asked for my advice on only a few occasions. More often than not, we've talked about things that have happened already, you know, as opposed to whether I thought they should happen.
And of course, Charlie Corella was also a colleague of yours.
Yep.
in the Byrne prosecutor's office in Essex County.
Well, we never served together in the prosecutor's
Oh,
office.
really?
Charlie had left the prosecutor's office by January of 1965 when I started. But I knew Charlie. I mean, I had met him along the way, and I knew him when he worked in the Byrne administration. And I've known him as a fellow lawyer for forever. But no, we never actually were colleagues, at least not at the same time, in the prosecutor's office.
Now, in those final days of the governor's second term, did you have occasion to get together with him and the family to sort of reminisce about the 8 years that he'd been in office?
I don't recall family get-togethers, but there must have been times when we, for one social occasion or another, were together, and it was just hard to imagine that in another X weeks or months he would be former Governor Byrne. It just seemed as if the governor years had flown by, and again, on a purely personal level, I was sort of looking forward to a chance maybe to see more of him in the coming years than I had in the 8 years that he was governor.
We'll talk a little bit more about that, about the post-gubernatorial relationship you had with him, and any anecdotes that you can remember during those years, these years.
Well, the years since have been very happy ones for me, because our friendship, our relationship has grown just increasingly, ever increasingly, over all the years since. It's been however many years, 28 or whatever it is, since he was in office. But we had occasion, and I'm again just trying to draw on my memory as to what specific things brought us together, but inevitably our friendship sort of grew even closer, and I had occasion to see him often in you know, on a sort of a, not a daily basis, but frequently. For example, I remember in those early years after he was governor being invited by him to join him and his brother Frank, Dr. Francis Byrne, for lunch at Pal's. And I was recalling with Brendan only recently how much fun those lunches were for me when I would be included in them, because I would sit there and listen to Brendan and Frank, first of all, swap jokes. And Francis Byrne, Dr. Frank, as we knew him, would tell Uncle Willie jokes, and Brendan would then counter with another joke. And being at lunch with the two Byrne brothers was like going to a Broadway show. And I remember a number of those occasions.
Before you go on, any other memories of Francis Byrne? Because we haven't had really any talk of him so far in this series.
Well, yeah, he was just a wonderful person. My earliest recollection that really stands out, and I may have mentioned this in one of our previous conversations, but at the first inauguration, the first inaugural ceremony, which took place in the New Jersey State Museum, it was a luncheon that followed the swearing-in ceremonies the first time. And Frank Byrne stood up and proposed, well, he spoke briefly about his brother, and he then recited that the great Gaelic prayer, "May the roads rise with you, may the wind be always at your back." It was a very poignant moment. I think Brendan, I know Brendan and Frank were extremely close. And even to this very day, when Brendan and I are talking about Frank, I see his eyes kind of mist over. He misses him even now. But along the way, I got to know Dr. Byrne fairly well. I remember being invited by the Byrne family to, I guess it was Frank Byrne's either 70th or 80th birthday party. You know, I'm not sure as I think about it now, but it was in the backyard of his home in Livingston. And the whole Byrne family plus assorted friends and acquaintances were there, and it was just a wonderful time. I remember that very well. And I had occasion to see, I live in Livingston, did then, and as did Dr. Byrne. And I saw Frank with some frequency. Just, you know, we'd see each other around town and we'd chat. And I got to know him fairly well. I knew his family, his first wife, Edie, who had worked in the Byrne administration in Trenton. Eventually got to know Dr. Byrne's second wife. So I knew him as I really got to know virtually all of the Byrne family.
Any other family sort of memories that you wanted to recount?
Well, you know, I can't help but feel a touch of sadness as I think of Susan, one of the Byrne kids that I got to know so well, who is now gone from our midst and all too soon. But most of the memories that I have of the Byrne family and of the Byrne children are happy ones. I recall going to Morven with my wife and my own kids years back, and all the children, the Byrne family and my kids running around Morven and having a wonderful time. I remember my son, who's now 39, but who at the time was just a youngster, going with, I think, Bill Byrne to watch Governor Byrne take off in a helicopter from a nearby park in Princeton. And the thrill that my son, you know, seeing a helicopter, probably for the first time in his life. I was always happily, not always, but often invited to Byrne family functions, birthday parties, or this party or that, and I felt fortunate to be, you know, made a sort of an unofficial member of the family, and therefore close, and happy when happy things happened, and obviously troubled when other kinds of things occurred.
Barry, to shift gears a bit, you're a very prominent member of the New Jersey Bar. Some of the major issues that Brendan Byrne faced during his 8 years in office were either largely or partially attributed to judicial activism by the New Jersey State Supreme Court. What's your sort of view, I guess, of the court in those years, in the 70s, when it was coming out with major landmark decisions and school finance and low-income housing, consumer protection, and so forth. What's your perspective? Good, bad, indifferent?
Oh, it's good. The New Jersey Supreme Court, virtually from the Constitution of 1947 to the present, has achieved real distinction nationally in terms of its stature as a judicial body. I can't attribute to Brendan Byrne the credit for all of that, because much of the stature of the court began before Brendan was governor. But in the years when he was governor, he named, I think, just outstanding people to the court who contributed to the reputation of the court. Now, and the court continues even to this day to be one that is highly regarded and respected throughout the country. Talk about judicial activism, which is of course a concept well known to the public, and it's discussed all the time. In terms of New Jersey, you think back to the school funding cases. You think back to the low and moderate income housing cases, the name of which is suddenly
Mount Laurel.
Mount Laurel, yeah, thank you. It's funny, the things that you might for a moment forget. There were those then and now who were critical of the court, for example, talking about Mount Laurel, saying, how dare the Supreme Court of New Jersey involve itself in what is essentially a legislative matter? How can the court find in the Constitution of New Jersey or elsewhere authority to mandate that municipalities of the state shall provide their fair share of low and moderate income housing? People were calling for the impeachment of Chief Justice Valence and so forth. But I've always been satisfied that the golden days of the New Jersey Supreme Court were when the justices, had the courage to do what they felt was legally correct under the law, under the Constitution. And so I have never been among those who were critical of the court, not of the New Jersey Supreme Court, or for that matter, not of the U.S. Supreme Court, for rendering decisions that had to do with, with people and their rights. I don't think that judicial activism is necessarily the accurate term, but neither do I think of it as a concept that is or should be foreign to judges. To put it all together, I think that the greatest justices of our New Jersey Supreme Court who have been those who had the courage to sign their names to the opinions that we've been talking about, opinions that brought about great, sometimes upheaval, but nevertheless decisions of great social importance. Remember that at least in the case of the Mount Laurel decisions, the court was responding to what was clearly a crisis in this state. In the instance of Mount Laurel, we're talking about a housing crisis. Governor Cahill, I think, had authored a sort of a white paper, or a white paper had come out while he was governor, talking about the extent of that crisis and the need for housing by those who could not afford to live where they wanted to live. The legislature had been almost inert, had done nothing in that field, and I think that's a good example of the court stepping in. Call it judicial activism if you wish, but stepping in to fill a void that had been left by a legislature that had done nothing. Now, maybe others would view the state constitution as not permitting the Supreme Court to step in, but I'm not among those, and I think it's to their credit that they handed down the Mount Laurel cases, although I have to tell you, now, years later, the housing crisis continues in New Jersey. And not as if the Supreme Court solved all the problems, but they had the courage to do what was right, to borrow one of Brendan Byrne's campaign slogans. And I'm proud of the court and proud to be a lawyer in New Jersey, serving under the Supreme Court today and in the years gone by.
Barry, why don't you talk a bit about your family today and your hobbies and interests? We've discussed some of this, I think, off the record, but
right.
Why don't you go into that?
Well, I have 2 children, a daughter who is a lawyer, now age 41. It's hard to imagine since I'm only 45. A son who's 39 and a talent agent in New York. My wife, Linda, has 2 part-time jobs, well, 3. She works and has for a number of years for Senator Lautenberg, doing constituent matters. She's also a part-time tax preparer, working for H&R Block, but her happiest part-time activity is being with our 4 grandchildren as often as she can, and that's true of me as well. I'm happy to say I've got 3 grandsons, 1 granddaughter, or we call her the princess, and that's made my life very special. I still practice law. I'm a member of a firm called Walder, Hayden and Brogan in Roseland, and Joe Hayden and Justin Walder are among my oldest friends as well as professional colleagues. The Brogan in the name, John Brogan. John has retired, but I'm happy to say I guess I gave John Brogan his first job as a lawyer way back in 1970 when I was with the Division of Criminal Justice and recommended to then Attorney General Kugler that a young fellow named Brogan be hired. So my relationship with these people goes back a long way. So I'm practicing law. I'm working on a book, as I mentioned before, about Brendan Byrne, which I hope very much I will complete this year. It's my intention to complete it. I'm not a professional writer, and I undertook this project just as a kind of a labor of love, and it seemed like a fun thing to try to do. And of course, in recent times, because Brendan Byrne's law office is literally on the same floor at 5 Becker Farm Road as our firm, I see Brendan almost daily. We have a cup of coffee 4 or 5 times a week together, and he has taken to asking me, "Hey Barry, how's the book coming?" And I say, "Well, I'm working on it." And he said, I just have one question, which he said, "I want to know one thing at the end of this book: do I live or die?" That's Brendan Byrne for you. But I've had fun, as I think I have told you, as we've had some chats over the years. I've been going around and doing a lot of oral interviews of people for the book, and that has been just so much fun. And I still play some tennis. I try to play golf, even though most people who see me out on the golf course would deny that what I'm doing is playing golf. And I have recently, as yet another facet of my extracurricular activities, been named, or I guess officially will be in about a week, named to the Board of Trustees of the New Jersey Symphony. I love music and classical music, so that's going to be another extracurricular activity that I look forward to.
We'll talk a little bit more. You discussed in your first session your early violin lessons.
Right.
And I think you've mentioned to me that you're thinking about taking the violin up again.
I am. I took my violin into a local violin shop in Livingston called Menzel's. Been there for many years. Had the strings replaced and the new hair put on the bow, and I'm going to take some lessons for my own enjoyment. I'll practice a lot when the house is empty so as not to scare anybody, but But I love music, I love the violin, and I'm going to take some lessons again. It's been, I guess it's been over 50 years since I last took violin lessons, but I'm determined to do it again.
Barry, before we end, any final thoughts on Brendan Byrne or the years during your lifetime in New Jersey as to how the state has changed or is evolving?
Well, as far as Brendan Byrne is concerned, as I have implied or expressed to you on a number of occasions, for me it's been a great treat, a great privilege really to have to have come to know him and to be able to say that he's a friend. He's a very special person. He was my mentor. As I've said, he was my first boss. And he's doing well. I'm happy to say as he approaches his 84th birthday, we're still playing golf together, still playing tennis occasionally. He looks wonderfully well, and he's certainly very active. I couldn't keep the pace. I really couldn't keep up the pace that he does on a regular basis between running into New York with Ruthie to theater and running around and advising Governor Corzine and doing all the things he does. I'm happy to say he's still young, and that makes me feel good. So I look forward to this year. I hit what is commonly referred to as a milestone birthday, and it begins with a 7, and it's hard for me to imagine, but I look forward to a lot more years of my friendship with Brendan and just doing the things that I've been enjoying doing in New Jersey. As far as our state, well, it's got many of the same problems it's always had, fiscal problems being number one, and I certainly hope that we who are the population of the state get together with Governor Corzine or whoever in the future is in charge to get our fiscal problems in order. It would be nice not to leave this state in an almost bankrupt condition to future generations once and for all, and I really admire Governor Corzine for having the courage to do what he's doing presently to try to get things straightened out a bit. I know that today was his budget message. I didn't hear it. I'll read about it soon. But I remain optimistic about the state and about the people in the state that I've been lucky to know.
Thank you.
My pleasure.